I arrived with a tin of cookies, wrapped in wax paper, and a suitcase that still smelled faintly of cedar. No one noticed the scent. No one asked what kind. Just a quick hug from my daughter while her phone stayed pressed to her ear. Hang on, Mom just walked in. And then she vanished into the noise of the kitchen, leaving me standing in the front hall like a delivery no one ordered. The house was full. Laughter spilled down the staircase. Someone was already chopping parsley. Music played low from a Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a stack of board games. It was reunion weekend, the big one they'd planned for months. Everyone was here. Well, almost everyone. I glanced toward the hallway, half expecting someone to guide me to a room, to ask if I'd eaten, to say, "We're so glad you came." Instead, I was handed a floral blanket, the thin kind you'd use on a toddler's bed, and told almost as an afterthought, the screened-in porch should be fine. It's summer anyway. But it wasn't summer. Not really. Not up here in the mountains, where the night air dipped low and sharp. "The guest room's taken," they said. "The couch is covered in coats, but the porch gets a nice breeze." Breeze. That was the word they used, as if breeze meant comfort, as if breeze didn't sneak into your bones when you were nearly 78 and tired from travel and trying not to make a fuss. I nodded. What else could I do? Make a scene? Ruin the weekend? I held the blanket close and smiled, saying, "That'll be fine," even as I felt the first tug of a cold I hadn't earned. The porch was tidy, at least. They'd put down a throw rug and a little lamp with a weak bulb. The cushions were worn, but dry. I laid my things in the corner, beside a potted fern, folded the blanket at the foot of the chaise lounge, and sat down. That's when I realized the blanket didn't cover my feet. Not fully. I stretched it. Still no use. Through the mesh screen, I could see the flicker of citronella candles on the back patio, hear the rise and fall of voices, children squealing, silverware clinking, someone popping the cork on a bottle of red. I wasn't invited out there. Not exactly excluded, but not remembered either. At dinner, they sat me at the kids' table. I smiled at Ellie and Mason, asked about their summer camps, passed the peas, but no one offered me a glass of wine. They passed the bottle twice, laughing, pouring generously for each other. I watched the droplets cling to the rim, shimmer in the overhead light, and vanish into someone else's glass. Later that night, I lay on the porch, hands folded across my chest, like I was waiting for a train that wouldn't come. Crickets chirped. Someone snored in the room beyond the wall. A car alarm blipped in the distance, then fell silent again. And the blanket, that poor excuse for warmth, slid off my ankles each time I shifted. At 2:12 a.m., I opened my phone. The screen lit up cold and blue. I tapped into the weather app. 43 degrees. Feels like 39. I wrapped my coat around my feet, cinched it with the belt from my robe. I didn't sleep. I stared at the rafters and thought of a night, 40 years ago, when my daughter had a fever and couldn't stop crying. I rocked her until the sky turned pink, held her close, whispered songs into her hair. "Mama's here," I told her. "You're safe. You're warm." Now here I was, given the porch. The floorboards creaked beneath me. The shadows on the walls looked like apologies no one said out loud. And still, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Just something hollow, the quiet knowledge that I wasn't a guest anymore. I was an afterthought, a placement, like the folding chair you bring out when too many people show up. By 4:43, the sky had softened. Not bright, not yet, but enough to see my own breath when I sat up. I folded the blanket neatly, zipped my suitcase without a sound. No note. No slammed door. Just me, the zipper, and a decision. I texted a rideshare. The driver arrived in 10 minutes, his headlights brushing against the ferns by the porch. "Early start?" he asked, loading my bag into the trunk. I nodded, climbing into the back seat. "Earlier than they'll notice," I said. My voice didn't shake, not even once. The kitchen smelled of basil and heat. Pots clanged. A blender whirred. Children darted past me, barefoot and sticky with juice. I stepped aside, careful not to spill the pitcher of iced tea I was holding. "Where do you want this?" I asked, lifting it slightly toward the counter. My daughter glanced over her shoulder. "Just anywhere, Mom, that's fine," she said, tossing greens into a bowl. "Oh, and watch out. Mason's got a Nerf dart stuck in the toaster again." I placed the pitcher down gently, out of the way. No one thanked me. No one noticed. It wasn't unkindness. Not exactly. It was omission. A soft forgetting. The kind that grows from busy schedules and assumptions, not malice. But it stung all the same. The kitchen island had become command central, covered in cutting boards, a pile of reusable bags, someone's laptop, a half-sliced watermelon. There was no room for me at the counter, no task waiting with my name on it. I hovered for a moment, hoping someone might hand me a knife or ask for help. Instead, my daughter's voice cut through the noise. "Ellie, grab Grandma's suitcase and put it by the porch door, would you?" "Oh, is that where I'm sleeping then?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah," she replied, not looking up. "We figured the porch would be nice." "There's a breeze tonight." I nodded slowly. "Right, the breeze." Shelley, my eldest granddaughter, passed by with an armful of lemons. "Do you want to sit down, Grandma? You look tired." "I'm fine," I said, though my back had begun to ache. I stood there anyway. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to fold into the corner of the room like a misplaced coat. In the past, I'd have been the one stirring the sauce, tasting for salt. I'd have been asked to bless the meal or carve the ham. This time, I was handed a paper napkin with a sprig of rosemary on it and told, "Dinner'll be ready in 20. So I wandered out of the way. The porch had been swept recently, probably for my benefit. A single chair and the lounge were arranged beside a citronella candle, already half-burned. My suitcase stood neatly near the screen door. I sat on the edge of the lounge, not quite ready to lie back. The cushion was thinner than I remembered from last summer, or maybe my body was just older. Inside, I could hear music playing, something upbeat and unfamiliar. Someone laughed too loud. A cork popped. The blender started up again. I looked down at my hands. They were still faintly flour-dusted from the cookies I'd baked. Oatmeal cranberry, my daughter's favorite. Or they had been, once. I had placed the tin on the counter when I arrived. No one had opened it. From the porch, I could see through the screen into the kitchen. My daughter's silhouette moved quickly, efficiently. I remember when she used to ask me how long to roast a chicken. What spice to use in lentils. I used to be necessary. Now, I was furniture, safe, decorative. "Grandma," Ellie's voice rang out as she pushed the screen open, letting it slam a little behind her. "You okay?" "Of course, sweetheart." She flopped onto the lounge beside me. "Mom says you get the porch. It's nice, right?" It is, I said, and for a moment, I believed it. She leaned into my side, warm and casual. That alone almost made up for everything. Almost. I saved you a lemonade, she said, standing and reaching through the screen door to grab a glass from the ledge. No ice. You don't like your teeth cold. I smiled, a little too fast. Thank you, darling. She ran off before I could finish my sip. The lemonade was sweet, tart, familiar, but it felt strange, sitting out here alone, drinking something handed off like a task completed. Back inside, they were setting the table. I watched as plates clinked, napkins were folded, bread was passed. I waited for someone to say, "Mom, come sit here," or "Grandma, help me with the salad," or even, "Where's your cookie tin?" Instead, I watched my daughter pour wine into 4 tall glasses, then set them at the adult table. She paused with the bottle, glanced toward the window, and then moved on without pouring a 5th. Something in me slumped. Later, when I joined them for dinner, my chair was already tucked in at the kids' table. They'd added an extra cushion for comfort, someone said. I squeezed in beside Mason, who immediately told me about his Minecraft house. I smiled and nodded, grateful for his excitement. When the toasts began, I raised my glass, just water, and clinked quietly with no one in particular. The tin of cookies stayed untouched. The morning came soft and slow, a breeze curling through the mesh screen like a reminder. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd closed my eyes and pretended, let my breath even out, so no one would hear the truth, that the cold kept me stiff and half awake, that the ache in my knees had become a dull, constant whisper. I folded the blanket, thin as a scarf, and placed it on the chair beside the potted fern. The dew on the porch boards soaked through my slippers as I stepped inside. I stood just beyond the kitchen, listening to the sounds of a family that didn't realize they were being overheard. The coffee pot burbled, toast popped, someone laughed, that full-mouthed, early-morning kind of laugh that used to belong to my kitchen. I waited for a moment, expecting someone to call out, "Morning, Mom," or "There's eggs if you want them." But no one did. There was no extra mug waiting for me on the counter. No seat left open at the breakfast bar. I hovered, hands loose at my sides, until my daughter finally noticed. "Oh, hi, you're up. We didn't want to wake you. There's still some coffee left," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the pot. Still some. I poured myself half a cup of lukewarm brew, the dregs bitter and thick. I stirred in cream from a carton that was almost empty and found a slice of toast that hadn't gone cold. No one offered me a plate. No one moved over to make room. So I stood at the edge of the counter and ate my toast over a napkin. Ellie came in from outside, barefoot and giddy. "We're going to the lake after lunch," she chirped. "Uncle Josh rented paddleboards." "Sounds fun," I said, smiling. She nodded, already running off. I waited a beat, then 2. "Should I pack a lunch?" I asked, looking at my daughter. She didn't look up from her phone. "Oh, no, we've got it. You can just relax today, Mom." "Relax." I nodded and walked back to the porch. My half cup of coffee still steamed faintly. I drank it slowly, letting the bitterness settle like truth on my tongue. That afternoon, the house emptied out like a tide going out. Voices fading, doors slamming, car doors clicking shut. I stood by the window and watched the caravan of SUVs pull away. Paddleboards strapped to roofs, towels hanging from the backs of seats. No one had asked if I wanted to come. No one had said, "We'll be back soon," or "Want to join?" I wandered through the quiet. The house smelled of sunscreen and bacon, faint and lingering. I picked up a towel from the hallway floor, folded it, and placed it over the railing. In the kitchen, the sink was full. I rolled up my sleeves. It wasn't that I minded doing dishes. I'd spent most of my life with my hands in soapy water. But today, it felt different, like I was cleaning up a party I hadn't been invited to. I wiped down the counters, took out the trash, organized the scattered shoes by the front door. Things they wouldn't notice had been done, but would certainly notice if they hadn't. I ate lunch alone. A slice of bread, toasted, half an apple. I found the tin of cookies still unopened on the sideboard. I didn't touch it. The rest of the day passed in muted light. I read a magazine that had been left on the couch, flipped through it without seeing the words. The pages smelled of coconut lotion. When they returned near sunset, damp and loud and sunburned, no one asked how my day had been. I asked if they had fun. They nodded, distracted. Dinner was burgers and corn on the cob. I helped shuck the ears in silence, standing beside Shelley at the sink. She didn't speak much, just hummed to herself and handed me husks. When it was time to eat, I waited to be told where to sit. This time, there was no seat at the kids' table. Someone else had taken it. I stood there awkwardly until someone dragged a folding chair from the garage and wedged it at the corner of the patio table. The ketchup was already across the table. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want to trouble anyone. I ate quietly. The burger was underseasoned, the corn overdone. No one noticed I hadn't finished. No one noticed when I got up to rinse my plate. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the adults sat with wine and old stories on the back porch, I stood behind the screen door, just out of sight. I listened to them laugh, watched the curve of my daughter's smile, the way she leaned against her husband. They looked comfortable, at ease, complete. I waited for someone to say, "Where's Mom?" or, "Go get her, she'll love this one." But they didn't. I could have stepped out, could have pulled the screen open and said, "What are you all laughing about?" But I didn't. I didn't want to join a moment that didn't miss me. Instead, I turned away and walked to the porch where my pillow waited. The blanket was still there, folded politely, as if that made it enough. I sat down, then lay back. My bones sighed into the cushion. Above me, the stars blinked through the mesh. Bright, indifferent. I wasn't sad. Not exactly. I was just becoming. Uncounted. Like a coat someone forgets they asked you to hold. Like a light bulb they keep meaning to replace. Like the cookies in the tin, sweet, thoughtful, untouched. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The cushion beneath me had flattened to a whisper. The blanket had slipped to the floor sometime after midnight. I didn't bother retrieving it. My coat was tucked around my legs, my hands curled inside the sleeves. I laid still, watching the shadows of tree branches sway against the screen, like old memories flickering behind eyelids. Somewhere in the house, someone laughed in their sleep. A door clicked shut. The wind shifted, and without meaning to, my mind reached backward, to another night, another porch, another kind of quiet. It was 1986, late spring. My daughter, the same one who now couldn't remember how I took my coffee, was 7. She'd had a nightmare, the kind that shakes the breath right out of a child. She came running down the hall, tears already slipping down her cheeks. "Mommy," she whispered, shaking me gently. "There's something in my room." I remember blinking awake, her face inches from mine, her curls damp with sleep. I didn't tell her to go back, didn't tell her she imagined it. I swung my legs out of bed, scooped her up, blanket and all, and carried her to the porch. Back then, the screened-in room had a swing. A wide wooden thing with thick cushions I'd reupholstered myself in navy ticking stripe. I sat down with her in my lap, and we rocked, back and forth, like a lullaby with no words. The porch smelled like tomato vines and dryer sheets. Crickets sang around us, not loud, but enough to stitch the silence together. She snuggled against my chest, her thumb tucked under her chin. "Is the monster gone?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head. "Monsters don't like rocking chairs," I said. "They get seasick." She giggled, half asleep already. We stayed there until the sun began to peek over the trees, a smear of peach against the gray. I remember feeling her weight grow heavier in my arms as she drifted off, safe and certain I would keep her there forever. That was the thing back then. I was the certainty, the warmth, the anchor. There were other nights like that. Nights when she'd come to me with a fever or a broken toy or questions about the moon. I always had an answer, or at least arms willing to hold her until the world made sense again. I remember birthdays, too. The ones I planned down to the detail. Hand-painted signs, cakes shaped like animals, party favors sorted into brown paper bags with each child's name carefully written in marker. She used to say, "My mommy makes the best birthdays." She used to pull me into photos, cling to my waist, flash her missing teeth and say, "This is my mom." Once, when she was 9, she wrote a poem for me, a school project. It read, "My mom is warm like toast. She smells like cookies and shampoo. She never forgets my mittens. She always knows what to do." I found it again recently, folded between the pages of an old photo album. The paper was yellowing, the corners soft, but the words were still there, inked in crooked letters, with a heart drawn beside my name. I don't know when that changed. There was no big moment, no fight, no slamming doors or shouted words, just time. Time and other people, new roles, husbands, jobs, children, priorities rearranged like magnets on a fridge. Some pushed higher, others shifted to the side. Some dropped off entirely. And somehow, somewhere, I went from the toast and cookies and mittens, to the porch, to the thin blanket, to the seat no one offered, to the extra body everyone managed around. I closed my eyes and tried to summon the sound of that old swing, the creak of its chains, the weight of her in my arms. It came faintly, as if from another life, and it made this moment sharper. The cold, the stillness, the way no one thought to check if I was warm enough, or rested, or simply okay. There was a time they wouldn't start dinner without me. Now they didn't notice if I'd eaten. There was a time she needed me to keep the monsters away. Now she wouldn't offer me a blanket, and I wondered, not for the first time, if I had made it all up. If the warmth I remembered was real, or just a trick of the mind. A softness my heart had conjured to survive the chill of being left out. But then I remembered the poem, the swing, the way she used to sleep with her hand curled around mine like an anchor. It had been real, which made this silence even more so. The next morning, I woke early. Not because I'd slept well, I hadn't, but because the cold finally drove me up. My knees ached, and the back of my neck felt stiff from the angle of the lounge cushion. I sat up slowly, adjusting my coat, and watched as the first blush of sun pushed against the mesh of the porch screen. The house was still, windows dark. Only the birds knew the hour. I reached for my phone from the pocket of my suitcase and tapped the screen. No messages. Not that I expected one. I opened the weather app instead. It was 43 degrees. Felt like 39. The number stared back at me like a diagnosis. Inside, I heard the creak of floorboards. Footsteps. Someone was up. My chest tightened, just slightly. Maybe it would be different this morning. Maybe they'd noticed. Maybe someone had woken early and remembered. Remembered that I was still out here. Cold. Uninvited. I folded the blanket again, smoothed my hair with my fingers, slipped my feet back into my shoes. Ready. The kitchen light flicked on. I could see it through the slats. Someone was in there. Maybe my daughter. Maybe she'd look out, see me sitting on the porch, and come out with an apology half said, or a warm mug of coffee, or even just, come in. Instead, I watched her silhouette pass the sink, then the fridge, heard the beep of the coffee maker, the slow hush of the refrigerator door closing. A spoon clinked against a ceramic mug. The microwave hummed. She never looked out. I sat there, back straight, the cold biting at my knuckles. I waited. Eventually, she turned off the kitchen light and disappeared back down the hall. A flicker. That's all it had been. That small, hopeful voice that whispered, this time might be different. That maybe the ice would break. That maybe someone would notice how quiet I'd become. How careful I was not to inconvenience, not to interrupt. I stood and pressed a palm against the screen, just for balance, just to be sure I was still real. The mesh was cold under my hand. I left no imprint. Inside, someone flushed a toilet. A child called out, still half asleep, and just like that, the house woke up, without me. I stepped into the hallway, shoes soft against the floor, and made my way to the bathroom to freshen up. The hand towel was damp, the toothpaste cap off. I washed my face, slowly, gently. I looked at myself in the mirror. No one had said I looked tired. No one had asked if I'd slept well. Later, I sat at the edge of the living room while breakfast took shape. Scrambled eggs, waffles, maple syrup. The good kind. The smell of coffee filled the air. They bustled around each other, laughing about something one of the kids had said. The baby threw a spoon. Someone ducked to pick it up. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. I waited quiet, thinking maybe they'd say, come sit, or did you get a plate, or even, we saved you the corner piece. But the chairs filled. The syrup passed hand to hand, and my hope, that small, pitiful spark, grew embarrassed and then retreated entirely. After the dishes were cleared, I stood to help, gathered forks, stacked mugs. Oh, you don't have to do that, Mom, my daughter said, barely glancing up. I smiled. It's fine. I like helping. I didn't. Not today. I dried each dish slowly, one by one, as the conversation moved on without me. They talked about weekend plans, about a movie someone wanted to see, about kayaking next summer. They laughed, corrected each other, filled the space where I wasn't. That's when I knew. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't just a busy weekend. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was habit. I had become something they managed, a soft shape on the outskirts of their circle, a body to assign a porch to, a tin of cookies to ignore, a chair to add only if needed. Hope is a funny thing. It doesn't always die with drama. Sometimes it just grows smaller each time you're not looked at. Each time your words trail off mid-sentence because no one's listening. Each time you smile and no one smiles back. By the time they headed out again, another hike, another plan I hadn't been included in, my hope had already packed its bag. I sat back on the porch, alone. The screen door clicked behind me, and this time it didn't feel like it was shutting out the cold. It felt like it was keeping the cold in. I didn't cry. That's the thing I keep circling back to. I didn't cry when the blanket slipped off my feet the third time that night, and no one checked. I didn't cry when the coffee was gone by the time I got to the kitchen. I didn't cry when my granddaughter called someone else auntie, while I dried the dishes with my hands still trembling from the cold. I didn't cry because I'd stopped expecting warmth. And that is the part that sits deepest in my chest. Not the cold, not the ache, not even the insult of being put on the porch like an extra chair. It's that somewhere, over time, I began to believe this was normal, that being invisible was just part of getting older, that gratitude was too much to hope for, that love at my age had to be quiet, and mostly one-sided. There was a time I mattered. I know that in my bones, even if no one else remembers. I mattered when their fevers ran high, when the electricity was cut and I read books aloud by candlelight. I mattered in the grocery store lines, when I counted pennies to make meals stretch. I mattered in every holiday that came together because I refused to let it fall apart. But now I'm just the woman with the cookies no one opened, the body in the porch chair, the name that gets squeezed into text threads after the plans are already made. I sat in that chair long after they left for the lake again. My coat wrapped around me like it was the only thing still trying to hold me. I didn't move for a long time. I just watched the trees shift in the wind, the dapple of sun and shadow on the grass, and felt emptied out. There's a particular stillness that comes when you realize no one's thinking of you. It's not dramatic. It's not even painful, not at first. It's a kind of hush, a soft, dense quiet, the kind that settles in your throat and makes everything taste like cardboard. I thought about walking into the kitchen, saying something, anything. Do you know it was 39 degrees last night? Or that blanket doesn't even cover my knees. But the idea of their faces, the polite shock, the guilted murmurs, the rearranged platitudes, made me sink further into the cushion. What would be the point? They'd apologize, maybe. Offer me the couch next time. Pass me a glass of wine with an extra splash and a thin smile. And I'd nod. And they'd believe everything was fine. I've done that before, too many times. I've nodded, I've smiled, I've folded myself into corners. I've handed over money, time, memories. I've stayed quiet so they could stay comfortable. I've been the helper, the background, the gratitude-less fixture. And maybe that's what they want me to be. Not a person, just a presence. But even presences get tired. I thought about the last time I felt full, truly full, not with food or sound, but with meaning. It was years ago. Thanksgiving, maybe. Before the family expanded, before the obligations outgrew the invitations. I was in the kitchen, pulling pies from the oven. My husband, long gone now, came in behind me, kissed the back of my neck, and said, "You do so much for everyone." That was all. Just that. And I'd stood there with the smell of cinnamon in the air and my hands in oven mitts, and thought, he sees me. That's all we really want, isn't it? Not praise, not attention. Just to be seen. Now, no one looks. Not really. They look past me. Through me. I sat with that for a long while, until my feet were numb and the sky began to bruise with dusk again. I reached into my bag, pulled out the little notebook I carry. The one with doctor appointments, grocery lists, dates to remember. I turned to the back, found a blank page, and wrote 3 words. Not coming back. The pen felt heavier than usual. I stared at the words for a long while. They didn't hurt to write. They felt inevitable. I'd reached my edge. Not in anger. Not in outrage. Just in silence. Silence like the kind you get when you finally accept something you've tried too long to change. I didn't sleep that night either. Not from cold this time. Or discomfort. I just lay there, eyes open, watching the stars shift through the screen like a clock I no longer obeyed. The blanket had slid down again. I didn't bother retrieving it. My body was tired, but something else had stirred. Something small, quiet, but sharp. It was around 3 a.m. when I sat up. Slowly. My joints resisted, but I moved with care, not urgency. I wrapped the coat tighter around myself and sat there still, with my feet tucked under me and my breath clouding the air. I thought about the cookies, still untouched, still wrapped in wax paper, still sitting in that tin with the floral lid I'd saved since 1974. I thought about how, at dinner, someone had handed me a paper napkin and then forgotten to pass the butter. I thought about how I'd gone the whole day without anyone asking, "How are you?" Not in a polite way, not out of routine, but really asking. And I thought about that moment in the kitchen, years ago, with my husband's voice behind me, warm and close, when I still felt seen, and for the first time in a long while. I felt something click into place. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunder, no declaration, just this quiet, certain knowing. This can't be all there is left. I wasn't angry, not even hurt, in that sharp, immediate way. The pain had passed days ago. What I felt now was a cool, settled clarity. Like a pond finally still enough to reflect. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for warmth, not for inclusion, not for someone to look up and remember I was out here. Because I had remembered myself. That was the shift, the turning, the realization that if I stayed like this, tucked away in corners, offered scraps of attention, treated like an afterthought, it wouldn't just be their fault, it would be mine too. I had allowed it, bit by bit. I had nodded and smiled and stepped aside so often that stepping back in felt impolite. I had folded into their lives like a paper swan, elegant, silent, easily discarded. But no more, not again. I didn't know yet what I would do. I didn't plan the next step. But something inside me, something old and stubborn, had woken up. The part of me that once knew how to carry a household, balance a checkbook, fight for a child's education, sit through grief and joy without flinching. That part was still there, and it was done waiting to be noticed. The stars were beginning to fade, the sky paling toward dawn. Birds murmured in the distance. Somewhere inside, someone would stir soon. Another day of being useful but not wanted, present but not counted. But I had changed. Not on the outside, not yet, but deep down where resolve lives. I reached for my notebook again, turned to a clean page, wrote one sentence in small, firm letters. I choose warmth, not permission, not acceptance. Warmth, and if I couldn't find it here, I would go where I could. At 4:43 a.m., I rose. No alarm, no creak of footsteps inside. Just me, my breath, my heartbeat, and the soft resolve that had settled into my spine overnight. The sky was a pale blue-gray, still holding its breath before morning. The porch was colder than usual, or maybe I was simply done pretending it wasn't. I folded the blanket for the last time, smoothed the corners, placed it neatly on the lounge like a thank you note I didn't mean. I zipped my suitcase carefully, quietly, pulling the tab slow so it wouldn't catch or sing. There was no anger in my movements, only purpose. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam a door. I didn't look for one last glimpse of anyone still asleep in their warm beds. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about choosing myself gently, without apology. I opened my rideshare app. The little car icon appeared almost instantly. Driver arriving in 6 minutes. I stepped down from the porch and into the dew-wet grass, suitcase wheels humming softly against the earth. At the end of the driveway, I paused. Not to look back, I already knew every detail. The crooked lantern, the rusted wind chime, the window with the bent screen where I used to wave to my granddaughter. I wasn't leaving that house. I was leaving who I had become in it. The car pulled up, headlights soft. The driver stepped out, a young man in a hoodie, earbuds dangling. "You Mary?" he asked, glancing at the app. I nodded, offering a small smile. "Yes." He took the suitcase, gently placing it in the trunk. "Early flight?" he asked. "No," I said, settling into the back seat. "Just early enough." He seemed to understand, didn't press, just nodded and drove. We rolled through the sleeping streets, past rows of mailboxes and dew-covered lawns, past the little bakery that wouldn't open for hours, past the hills I once imagined retiring near. The world looked soft, forgiving, like it hadn't yet decided who I was. At the station, I tipped him and retrieved my bag. He gave a small wave and drove off. Inside, I purchased a one-way ticket. Not to anywhere dramatic. Just to a small town I remembered passing through years ago. A place with a bookstore that smelled like wood, and a cafe that served tea in real cups. The woman behind the counter handed me the paper ticket, her nails painted lavender. "Going far?" she asked, more out of politeness than interest. "Far enough," I said. I sat on a bench near the platform, suitcase at my side, the morning sun climbing slow and sure over the horizon. I opened the tin of cookies. No ceremony, no sadness, just a cookie. Still soft in the center, just the way I made them. I ate 2, then resealed the lid and turned to the man across the aisle. Gray hair, kind eyes, a newspaper folded on his lap. "Would you like one?" I asked, holding the tin toward him. He looked surprised, then smiled. I'd be honored. We talked a little, about nothing important, summer storms, trains, books we hadn't finished. He said something about second chances, and I let the words hang in the air like fresh laundry, warm and clean. And for the first time in days, I laughed. Not big, not loud, just enough. The train arrived. I boarded, found a window seat, watched the trees blur into motion. I was moving, and I was whole. No scene, no closure. Just this, a woman who once sat quietly on a porch, cold and unseen, now wrapped in her own quiet warmth, headed toward somewhere of her own choosing. Because sometimes dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you pack in a suitcase and carry forward. By late afternoon, I had arrived. The train slowed into the station of a town I'd passed through once long ago, on a family trip we barely remember now. Back then, I'd seen it from the passenger seat. Just a glimpse of brick buildings and hand-painted signs. The kind of place you told yourself you'd come back to one day when there was time. Now, there was time. I stepped off the train with my suitcase in one hand and the cookie tin in the other, now light and half empty. The breeze here didn't bite. It cradled. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and sun-warmed stone. The inn was small and quiet, nestled between a bookstore and a cafe with a faded chalkboard menu. Flower boxes spilled over with marigolds and lavender. A cat stretched on the front step, indifferent and at ease. Inside, the woman at the front desk offered me a room with a view of the square. The quilt on the bed was hand-stitched, thick and worn in with kindness. The radiator clanked gently. The windows opened just enough to let in air but not chill. It felt, not extravagant, but considered, like someone once cared enough to make comfort last. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the room. Then I exhaled. Not dramatically, just fully. And then I reached for my phone. No missed calls. Just one text from my daughter. "Mom, you disappeared. Are you okay?" "No, we miss you." "No, we're sorry." Just the startled realization that the porch was empty, the suitcase gone, the quiet compliance no longer present. I held the phone for a long while, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, perfectly, I needed a little warmth. And sent it. No follow-up, no explanation. Just the truth, compact and final. I set the phone down and stood. The mirror above the dresser caught me, not the version of myself I'd seen in their glances, but the woman I remembered being. Tired, yes. Weathered, but intact. I opened my suitcase, took out the notebook, and flipped to that page. I choose warmth. I wrote beneath it, and I won't ask twice. Then, slowly, I reached into the side pocket of the suitcase and pulled out a small photo. An old one, the kind you keep tucked away even after the edges curl. It was from that family vacation all those years ago. The cabin I'd paid for, the meals I'd cooked, the smiles I'd held together. I looked at it one last time. Then I tore it, gently, not out of anger, but with the care of someone pruning what no longer grows. I placed one half in the trash. The other, I slid into the notebook, tucked between the pages where my words live now. A reminder, some things are better held as lessons than lifelines. That evening, I lit a small candle beside the bed. The flame flickered warm against the quilt. I sat with it, breathing steady, notebook on my lap. And I wrote, you can love people with your whole heart and still walk away from the parts that shrink you. Warmth isn't something you beg for. It's something you go find. I closed the notebook, turned down the covers. The blanket was thick. The room was quiet. I didn't need the porch anymore. The morning came warm, not the sun that hadn't risen yet, but the room, the kind of warmth that seeps into the floorboards, into the space behind your shoulders, into the ache that lives in your ribs when you've gone too long unheard. I woke slowly without stiffness, without dread, no porch chill clinging to my skin, no creaking from the floorboards of people who'd forgotten I was nearby. Just the hush of a quiet town not yet awake, and the soft weight of a real blanket resting over my legs. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, I didn't feel the need to prepare myself. No script in my head, no smile rehearsed. I just breathed. The little inn smelled like cinnamon and wood polish. Downstairs, someone had already started the coffee. I could hear it faintly, like a lullaby playing in reverse. I stretched, and when I sat up, it wasn't out of duty. I padded to the window and opened it slightly, just enough to let the breeze in. The real kind, not the kind someone uses to justify a sleeping arrangement. Birds were beginning to chirp in the trees. A man in a flannel jacket unlocked the cafe across the street. The world was making room for morning, and this time I didn't feel like I had to tiptoe through it. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the small pot in the room. It was strong, hot, just the way I like it. I added a splash of cream and sat by the window, watching the day begin. No one needed me right now. No one expected anything. And instead of feeling forgotten, I felt free. I opened my notebook. The page from yesterday still sat open. Warmth isn't something you beg for. It's something you go find. I smiled. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't pride. It was something gentler, like recognition, like finding your own reflection after thinking it had disappeared. I wrote one more sentence. And once you find it, you never settle again. After breakfast, real breakfast, brought to my table with a cloth napkin and a waitress who looked me in the eye, I visited the bookstore next door. The owner wore wire-rimmed glasses and offered me a quiet hello. The shop smelled like paper and possibility. I bought a novel, one I'd been meaning to read, and a postcard with a watercolor of the town square on the front. I sat in the cafe a while, pen in hand, wrote a note on the postcard, but I didn't address it. Not yet. Some things need to sit before they're sent. That afternoon, I strolled through the quiet streets. I watched the wind nudge the awnings, the light fall gently on stone sidewalks. I passed a shop with vintage quilts in the window. One caught my eye, rose-colored patches with soft blue corners, like something from a memory that had never grown cold. I bought it, cash, not card. When the woman asked if it was a gift, I smiled and said, yes. She wrapped it carefully. I carried it back to the inn, placed it on the end of the bed, and sat beside it for a long while. Not thinking, not planning, just being. I didn't need to tell anyone off. I didn't need to make them see what they had done. I wasn't interested in punishment. I had simply chosen something else. That was enough. And maybe one day they'd notice. Maybe they'd look around the next time they gather and realize something quiet and constant was missing. Not to guilt them, not to wound them, but to remind them. You don't get to assume people will always stay where you leave them. Even soft things walk away when they've been placed too many times in the wrong room. As night fell, I lit the same candle as the night before. Its flame flickered against the rose-colored quilt. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat at the desk by the window, and I began to write. Not to them, to me. A letter of return, not to a place, but to a self I'd almost let go of. One who didn't sleep in corners. One who didn't wait to be asked in. One who walked out, early and unnoticed, and into a life that no longer made her beg for room. Outside, the stars came quietly. Inside, I was already home.